Some customers will ask,
hey, can you just stain my side of the fence?
this is a great example of why we just simply don't offer that.
125 square foot a gallon, it is running and dripping down the fence. That's what's going to give us all of our protection, and it's going to self-level. So
They call it a flood coat for a reason. You are absolutely flooding the stain material.
in a short amount of time that this has been on here, there's nothing you're going to do to get it off the surface of that wood now.
Guys, if you learn nothing else from this video, that is a killer point. That make sure you coat.
Today's video is brought to you by our good friends over at Nationwide Industries, the Fence Pros' #1 choice. And they are this Fence Pros' #1 choice for a couple reasons. One, we love using their Keystone Traverse latches. They're easy to install. You simply bolt them onto the post. No drilling for rods or cutting the rods required. It's a pretty straightforward installation process. We also love using their full line of galvanized hardware. It shows up quickly and reliably. All right, guys, today's video is titled Easy Fence Staining with Even Coverage, Wood Defender Workshop. This is from the SWI Fence YouTube channel. If you guys haven't checked out their channel, you absolutely should. If you'd like to watch the entire video in its entirety, we will link that in the comments below so you can watch it without my commentary and all of that goodness. Let's dig into it. All right, so we're starting in on the video roughly 3 minutes in. The first few minutes was kind of like a factory tour there at Wood Defender. Purpose of this video today is I'd like to show you guys some application methods that might seem counterintuitive until you do it a few times. One thing worth noting, so this is from a training that was sponsored by Wood Defender. When he's talking, most of what he's talking about can be applied to most all penetrating oil-based sealants. So it looks like we've got, just first blush, a little bit of cedar there on the right, a little bit of what looks like pine on the left.
I want you all to notice, we talk about coverage rates of 125 square foot a gallon. He's going to show you what that looks like.
And so that's a very good rule of thumb, 125 square foot per gallon. And that's each side, meaning that for a 6 foot tall privacy fence, you've got to take into account both sides of the board when you're calculating that square footage. For a margin of error, we usually run with 100 square foot a gallon. That way it takes into account the stain that's in the hose, gives us a little bit extra in case we need to do touch-ups, but somewhere in that 100 to 125 square foot per gallon will make sure you're in a safe zone.
Real tentative to put it on and don't want to get any runs or drips. 125 square foot a gallon, it is running and dripping down the fence. That's what's going to give us all of our protection, and it's going to self-level.
So what he's alluding to is you want to make sure there's full saturation on this board. They call it a flood coat for a reason. You are absolutely flooding the stain material over this fence to make sure, one, the coverage is good, but also make sure there's enough of the stain on the fence that it can absorb and still have some left in case it's a little bit more thirsty, in case it can take a little bit more stain. So one thing to note here, so he's got a wand that is actually spraying down, spraying the stain in a downward direction. What he's doing is he's coating the tops of these pickets. You get good coverage on the top of those pickets, but also that he's not just creating a ton of overspray that's going to go out into the air on the other side and maybe coat something on the other side of the fence. So make sure if you've got one similar to this that you do have it coated or pointed down rather than up as you're trying to get the tops of those pickets.
With this product, again, saturation. As long as we meet saturation, it's always going to soak in evenly, uniformly, no runs, no drips, no back brushing required.
Some people disagree on the back brushing. Now, he said required, so I think the argument is for a little bit better coverage, back brushing might be a nice additional step, but with flood coating for a penetrating oil-based stain, one of the nice things about it is it doesn't require back brushing, but it might lead to a nicer end result.
In a matter of moments is already self-leveled, okay? Now, I also want you to take note, this is a transparent fence stain. We can't hide any of the imperfections that were in the wood before we started, and in some cases the transparent will highlight that, all right? So everybody's aware of the state of the world we're in and the availability of lumber. We're getting lesser grade cedar, okay? this is kind of what you're gonna see, that wane in the wood. But think about it. On these boards, you can see the wane in the wood before we started, so you can plan on seeing them when we get done with transparent stain. It's gonna highlight any variances, any differences, knot holes, wood grain.
One thing to note also is you're going to tell a difference if you've replaced a few boards. So a lot of times people will come through and do repairs on the fence before they stain it, make sure it's in good order. Using a semi-transparent stain, you're going to notice a difference between the new board and the existing board, just in terms of, one, how much of the stain they accept, how much of the pigment is accepted into that board. But two, just you're going to notice one is markedly younger, newer than the other, just in terms of how dark each board is. Now, transitioning to a darker color, something like a semi-solid color or a solid, will do a better job at covering up the difference between new pickets and existing pickets if you're staining a fence before you go ahead and stain it, if you're repairing an existing fence before you stain it. Now, another thing to note, he's using a backpack pump-up sprayer. You really don't have to use any of the higher-end, more expensive, either low-pressure or high-pressure spray systems. You can apply this with a basic pump-up sprayer. He's got a backpack pump-up sprayer, so he can hold more stain. He doesn't have to fill it up as often. But you could get the same results or similar results from using just a standard 1, 2, 3 gallon pump-up sprayer. Understand, you're going to have to fill it much more often though.
If you're unsure if you got enough on or if that's the way it should look, go put some more on. Okay, you're not going to harm the finished process or the finished look of the fence. Nothing you can do. So while we're there, let's make sure that we've got all these areas touched up.
The reason they're really touching on this is for a water-based or film-forming stain. If this stain had already started to set and he had sprayed more on it, once everything is dry, once this finish is complete, that would be much darker. It would be noticeable that it was stained over twice or there was multiple layers of stain applied there. It's also when you see stain that has overlapping brush marks, you see striping. Or if you see a thicker band or thicker color, darker color of stain on the middle of the fence, they went through and stained the top, came through and stained the bottom, with that middle having a bunch of overlap, and you'll get right in the middle of the fence a really dark stripe down it. Pretty dead giveaway that it wasn't a penetrating oil-based stain. Again, these products are self-leveling, which means you're not going to see that dark overspray or the overlapping lines.
Just by spraying it on the front and the back, it's going to wrap itself around the edges, the top, the bottom, and we're going to stain every edge of that board by applying it to the front and the back.
Some customers will ask,
Hey, can you just stain my side of the fence?
maybe they and the neighbors don't get along, maybe they're trying to cut cost. This is a great example of why we just simply don't offer that. You can see the stain getting pulled through the knot holes. They call it a penetrating stain for a reason. It's going to soak through that board. It's going to wrap around the edges. It's going to pull through the knot holes. You'll end up with a fence that looks polka dotted, has lines down the edges. It's not going to be a great look. Do your customer a favor. The bid you give them is for both sides of the fence to make sure it's a nice, even coverage.
Okay. He's going to bring his gun down past the top rung of the fence. Therefore,
Again, he's got this spraying down. So while you do see overspray, it's not going up into the air to get caught by the wind. It's being blown down, reducing overspray, but also making sure that we're coating that top edge really nicely.
all right, so he's going to cut in along the top. Now look, stop. Step back. Everybody seeing what we're seeing already? So this is real quick. We're going to learn from this. Everybody's going to be an expert. You can see the tops of the pickets aren't stained. Okay, that's going to be a callback. When the housewife goes upstairs, clean up the playroom, looks out over her backyard and sees the white pickets everywhere, you're going to be coming back.
Let's get the elbow up, and we're going to stay close to the fence, and we're going to kind of do a raking action. So you'll pull the trigger and come down just past the nail holes. Come on
There
down.
you go.
Yeah.
See the difference? Now
There
we're getting
you
the
go.
tops of the pickets. That's crucial.
Guys, if you learn nothing else from this video, that is a killer point. Make sure you coat the top of those pickets. There's also an alternate takeaway here also is get down low after you've stained the fence, get down low, squat and look under the rails. If you're on the inside of the fence, make sure you're looking at every angle. Caleb says it best when he says, go sit on the patio in their furniture and look at everything. It could be if their patio sits down lower, you're standing up. Everything looks great. The homeowner comes out, sits down below that eye level in their chairs, having coffee in the morning, and they see that the under part of the 2x4, the missed part, is readily apparent that, hey, we missed or we didn't coat as well underneath these rails, and that will also generate a callback. So what they're illustrating here is, again, this is talking about it with film forming or other types of stain. If you had written these letters into regular stain and then went and sprayed stain over it, you would see these letters after everything's dry because it would have multiple coats. They don't self-level, they don't penetrate, they form a film on the outside of the board, and you would see at the end of this AFA. Now, spoiler alert, when we get into this video a little bit, that AFA is going to disappear once this fence is dry.
Put that on there and it's not going to change anything about the way it absorbs into the wood. A lot of stains that you're going to see out there in the market, if you paint, you're going to get those lateral marks and you're going to have back brushing you have to do. It doesn't matter how thick you put this stuff on, it can be dripping down the picket itself and it's going to blend in. You can put it on here and then leave that panel for a couple hours, and they were talking about like 105-degree heat in the sun, and come back 2 hours later and it'll still blend in. And that's amazing because that's one of the biggest things we fight.
For about an hour is what we really are shooting for. The longer it can be on, the better, right? But it's going to happen, and it does happen. But
all right, so I think this clip maybe missed a little bit of context. I believe what he's talking about is rain readiness or rain hardiness. Nothing's, when it's wet, it's never rain proof. If you get an absolute downpour, you could have to come back and retreat a few areas on this. But if you give it an hour, anything over an hour is better. But if you give it an hour before it gets rained on, again, not rain proof, but maybe like rain resistant. If you give it an hour, you should be good to go.
a short amount of time that this has been on here, there's nothing you're going to do to get it off the surface of that wood now. It's had an opportunity to soak in, and it's going to stay there. It's going to bead the water. It's going to shed the water nicely. The fence is protected.
What does Wyoming think?
I like it. It's good. It's
These
good
are some
stuff.
fellow people from Wyoming, all the way down here in Texas.
I
Who
know.
thought I'd run into Wyoming down
Yeah,
here?
I know, right? We hitchhiked.
Now notice on this, I mean, there's different ways to approach this with the customer. So there's no ground protection laid down. Sometimes you'll see guys use, I don't know, maybe recycled cardboard boxes, maybe some plastic lay down protection. What you want to be careful with laying plastic down under this is in a warm summer, it's absolutely going to cook anything under it. It's going to turn into a greenhouse effect and amplify the heat that sun's producing. Like I said, fry everything underneath it. You know, if the customer is willing to pay a little bit more to have some ground protection down, it's probably something good to offer. Or just make sure they know, hey, until this grass greens up, you will see some stain on the ground. Once the grass greens up, it should fade away. It should just disappear altogether.
So you just put that on before you start, and it just gives it an extra little film to help keep it from sticking?
Yeah, especially in the summertime when it gets really hot.
So, and they might discuss it here in a minute, but typically what you would spray down would be like soapy water, Dawn and water, something like that. That's going to keep that oil suspended so that when you go and clean off the concrete, that stain hasn't penetrated into the concrete. It sat on the surface on that soapy water, and it can be cleaned up with just a light degreaser.
It'll stay wet longer. So we're just worried about anything porous right now. He's going ahead of the guy spraying.
So it's all the brick, keeping all the brick clean
We're not
and
worried
wet.
about the windows, the gutters. Now, if the paint, you know, this is good paint, so if the paint on the gutters was real chalky, then we'd probably want to keep that wet because it will absorb the stain at that point. I can promise you the windows, the gutters, it will all be cleaner than when we first got here. So
have to make a trip back, or you don't want the neighbor to have overspray. So you always want to check the neighbor's property as well.
So again, another great takeaway, another great point. Make sure all the porous surfaces are, it looks like they're just using straight water. Totally fine. Soap added to that helps it clean a little bit. Just making sure everything's wet though keeps that oil in suspension until you go to re-wet it or wash it off. Lets that oil come off the, in this case, the brick or the concrete patio without actually penetrating and staining, what you don't intend to be staining. In this video, he's using obviously a pressurized system. You can use these as well, not necessarily required. I mean, obviously we saw a gentleman use a backpack pump-up sprayer. Stay tuned on the channel in the future. We're going to be doing a video where I use just a standard 2-gallon pump-up sprayer to stain some fence we've got here to show you that even with tools you can find at your local home improvement store, you can apply some really good stain. After this, they go back into a shop tour. So this will conclude the portion of the video that talks about fence staining. So we'll go ahead and wrap the video up here. Let me know your thoughts. It could be about maybe this particular stain or just in general oil-based penetrating stain. What do you think? Did it turn out nice? Is it something that you think you could try? If it's not something you think you could try, why not? Maybe we can help you through that process. Leave all that in the comments below. I love seeing your guys' comments and interacting with you in the comments section. For now, Joe Everest, the fence expert, reminding you that good fences make good neighbors, and I'll see you next time.